It's called the Solo model, and later on developed by the Dodges model or by Indo model by the what's his name, Romer. Okay, what he was saying is basically that, you know what, the economy in the long run, everything depends on how much individuals invest and how much they save and therefore invest. This is why you see a lot of focus on why Chinese are saving so much. You know, why should we even think about that? It's because it is an indicator, not necessarily a fact, but it is an indicator of future potential growth. Okay. All right, so that means that it is important to know who is doing the saving. Because not everybody is saving. You have to determine who is doing the saving, who sees value in the future. Okay? And in South Africa, the problem is this. Most of the savings, that is like here, all these guys, most of the savings are done, actually like this. Okay, are saved by what we call the private businesses. And then, less so by the governments, here, and also what we call I think it's the private corporations. But it's missing out one key component, that is the households. Private households in South Africa don't save. In fact, some of these guys, us basically, people, they actually, around the financial crisis, because they didn't save for so long, they actually went into deficits. Okay, household deficits. The households in South Africa is quite heavily in debt because they don't save. They will rather spend money on cars, BMWs, preferably white and like old versions and so on. So they'd rather spend it to debt rather than saving. So, and that has a huge implication for future potential growth, because that means that, first of all, these guys are vulnerable to any fluctuations in the economy, especially the global economy. And second of all, their future potential growth the potential is not particularly strong. Okay? So I've just given you both the micro and the macro picture. What are the issues? Okay, in my view, I'm just going to narrow it down to about 3 of them. Okay, first of all, what is the go-to guy when you think about the economy is in trouble? Suppose that so many people are in poverty, as South Africa have now, is poverty, inequality, and unemployment. What's the go-to guy? What's the solution? Number one solution that always comes up in the literature. Do you have any suggestions? What's the solution? What should we do? If you have a bunch of money, where should we put it in? What do you want to grow?
Education.
Thank you. Education. Education is always the go-to guy. In fact, it has come on many, many presidential campaigns. Education, education, education. But there's nothing wrong with investing in education, but I just want to tell you something that recently was developed by the World Bank. It's called the Human Opportunity Human Opportunity Agenda. Okay? Agenda. And it was developed by somebody called the Marcelo. Okay. I think it's something like this. I don't remember his name. But he was a professor, and he was in Brazil. He's a Brazilian. Whoever speaks Spanish here. And he basically did this huge study where he looked at, all right, I'm going to put a lot of money in the schools, and then regardless of where these kids come from, and then just observe them for the next 10 to 15 years and see how that works out. Then after that time, then he finally did the analysis, and he realized that no matter how much money you put at school level, okay, the children's background still sort of haunts them. Okay, in other words, it doesn't matter how much money you have at the school level, or resources, how many pencils you have, or infrastructure, and so on. If after the school time and the kids go home and he's surrounded by gangs, drugs, violence, rape, you know, all sort of bad things. So questions such as, are the parents employed? Are there two parents? Are they educated? Are there books at home? Are there computers at home? Are there internet access to information at home? Things like that actually determines much more on their future outcomes, their future educational outcomes, than actual educational investments. This has some serious implications, because what is that suggesting, essentially? It's basically suggesting that if you are unlucky enough to be born in a very poor household, with no access to anything, surrounded by violence, surrounded by gangsterism and so on, your fate is sealed. Okay? You are doomed before you see the light of day. And there's no future opportunities for you before you're even born, basically. Okay? And that, although it's a very difficult study, because you have to basically follow these guys, these babies, from when they were small to big, right? But it has somewhat showed up in South Africa and everywhere else, quite frankly, that this is the pattern. For how many years that, well, actually for the past 18 years, the government of South Africa, we've invested about 20%, consistently, 20% of our national budget, 207 billion rand, 4% of our national GDP into education. Consistently, okay? And 18 years after, we still see the exact same pattern. People who are born in poor households, households without access to basic needs, households without sort of parents who are employed, uneducated, their future earnings and future employment opportunities are literally just none. There's just no impact whatsoever. Okay? And that just shows you, despite the fact that, yeah, we all know kind of education is the go-to guy, but there are limitations. Okay? So it's not a sort of like a one cure for all kind of remedy. Just, we have to get that very clearly. I love this example. It's actually in China, but it's very inhuman and very, very sort of immoral in a sense. But what they did was, I wasn't there, but I mean, I know people who did that, who were part of that program, is that after their Cultural Revolution, the Communist Cultural Revolution, they realized that, you know what, we can't just rely everything on agriculture and mining. So what they did was, they went to these rural areas, grabbed the kids from the sort of primary, preschool and so on, literally put them into boarding schools and re-educate them. This is one of those re-educational camps, okay, but not, yeah, there is some communist, obviously, propaganda going on, but basically it was a re-educational camp on the basis of sort of science, just study, okay? And we will protect you from all the sort of the poverty, the sort of hard labor at home. Okay, and then they put them through all the motions from primary to tertiary education, and some of them actually, most of them actually, they become, just hold on, I just want to quickly, okay, cool, thanks. Most of them actually turn out quite alright. I mean, I know a physics professor at University of Pretoria. The wife also went through the same program, and she's a master's in mathematics. And you should see their son just acing everything. Okay. All right. Next thing is exchange rates. We always keep on hearing that, and especially in the South African political debates, is that the notion behind the exchange rate is that if we were able to lower the exchange rates, that means that we depreciate our own rands. Okay? Then that means to the foreigners, which is you guys, who sold dollars to buy rand and to buy South African goods, okay, it will be cheaper. And by doing so, the South African goods might become more competitive because it's cheaper on the international market, and therefore inviting more foreign demands and so on. And that could potentially grow the economy through selling these goods, these cheaper goods. Okay? There are two considerations behind this notion. One is that, let's just hear that again. when you suddenly go and look at the GDP share by industry of this country, in the past 18 years, the three industries that made the most noises about this, which are the agriculture, mining, and manufacturing sectors, the share of GDP of those three industries actually don't adding up, right? Total of those don't hold a candle to the single largest industry in South Africa, which is the financial and the real estate sector and the business sector. Okay, so that just shows that despite whatever happened, there's pretty much, there wasn't growth opportunities in those industries. Another consideration is this: in the past 18 years, the period which those industries grew the fastest, okay, were not actually during the time where the value of the rand were at its lowest. Okay, it actually grew during the 2000 to 2005 period, and during those times, rand were actually trading about 6 rand to the dollar, or 6.5 to the dollar. So it was actually during the time when the rand was the strongest that those industries grew the most. So it's sort of like counterintuitive given all those facts. That's the exchange rate story. Final issue that I sort of want to show you is the issue about unions. We've all heard that on the news. Some people died, and 34 people died, I think, at the Marikana mines, and it was terrible. But I think, well, don't hold me to it, but basically there are two problems in this whole union issue. First thing is the bargaining process in this country is a mess, okay? Because of the union rivalry and sort of this disorganization amongst the unions, okay? In other words, you have so many different little unions. Among themselves, they don't have an agreement who their members are. And one of you could come to, say, the employers, and then you guys sign an agreement saying that, you know what, I agree to this wage arrangement, so we are happy. But then the other group might not be happy with it. So the other one obviously goes to strike. And in the process, because you guys are in the same industry, these guys, the guys who signed the agreement actually signed for the other group in the same industry. So when these guys went to strike, they actually are partaking in an illegal strike, because you just tear up the agreements as you please. And that obviously shows a significant sort of miscommunication among the unions and the union head leadership. And that's when you hear on the news when they say illegal strike. You have to understand that that's what it means. It means that they must have signed the paper saying that we agree to this wage arrangement for the next however many years, but now we're unhappy with it, and then we're basically ignoring that agreement because it's a contract. We're ignoring that contract and we're going to strike. That's the first problem. The other problem is that the people who are disgruntled, the union sort of sects that are disgruntled, they actually partook in this, the most primitive, the most backward, savage, and just almost terrorist kind of behavior. What they do is that they will actually, when they are striking, they will actually say, go to the bus stops, okay, and tell everybody else not to go work. And if you do, the story that I heard it from many people is that if you do, then we'll maybe burn down your house while you're gone, or while you're working, or we will maybe take away your property or something like that. So they sort of took on this very almost terrorist kind of approach to their bargaining table, and you can see it has resulted in a lot of conflict, and leading to obviously the Marikana incidents where people are apparently killed, and some police brutality and so on and so forth. Okay. So I've just given you sort of all the issues the main issues in South Africa in sort of like a condensed and packed sort of in a pill, as it were, and I think I'm running out of time. So thank you again, and questions are welcome. Okay? Thanks. So now I suppose we're just open for questions. No questions? You wanted to ask? Oh no, you just
That's
talking
my
about
question.
time. Yeah.
What's the worst the rand has ever been in terms of like exchange rate to the dollar? Do you know? Like in the past, since 1994? Now it's like 8.
Now it's 8, right? Close to